I'd spent a lifetime building my fortune, and there was no way I was letting my soon-to-be ex-wife take half of my $100 million. I thought I was being smart when I secretly moved every single penny before she could file the papers. Sitting in the courtroom, I watched her lawyer open the empty bank statements, waiting for the panic to set in. But instead of crying or screaming, she just looked at me with a cold, terrifying smile. That smirk told me she had an ace up her sleeve, a dark secret that could destroy my entire life. The sun barely peeked through the blinds of my home office as I finalized the transaction. My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard while I authorized the wire transfer. This was the final chunk of the funds, and it brought the main account balance down to nothing. I watched the progress bar load slowly until the confirmation screen appeared. The Cayman Islands account was now flush with cash, and my domestic accounts were completely dry. It felt like a massive weight lifted off my shoulders. I refreshed the banking portal one last time to make absolutely sure the numbers were correct. A perfectly round zero stared back at me from the screen, exactly as I had planned. Satisfied with the result, I shut the laptop with a decisive click. There was no digital trail left on this machine that anyone could easily find. I slid the computer into my leather briefcase and locked the latches tight. Now the money was safe, and Evelyn wouldn't get a dime. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number for my attorney, Marcus. He answered on the first ring, sounding alert and ready for the day ahead. I asked him for confirmation that the shell companies were watertight and untraceable. Marcus assured me that even the best forensic accountants would hit a dead end. We kept the conversation brief to avoid raising any red flags with the service provider. Everything was set for the hearing this morning. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror and adjusted the knot of my silk tie. My suit was crisp, and I looked every bit the successful businessman I was. I grabbed my briefcase and headed out the front door into the cool morning air. A black sedan idled in the driveway with the engine running softly. The driver stepped out to open the rear passenger door for me. I slid onto the leather seat and told him to head straight to the courthouse. The car pulled up to the curb with plenty of time to spare before the hearing began. I climbed the stone steps and went through the security checkpoint without issue. The hallway outside the assigned courtroom was relatively quiet this early in the morning. I leaned against the wall and checked my watch while scanning the corridor. Evelyn was usually punctual, so I expected to see her any minute. I was ready to see the look on her face when the truth came out. Marcus met me outside the double doors, and we walked into the courtroom together. I settled into the hard wooden chair at the defendant's table and unpacked my notepad. Across the aisle, Evelyn entered the room and took her seat at the plaintiff's table. She didn't bring a large team, just herself and a young lawyer I didn't recognize. She sat with her back straight and didn't look in my direction once. The air in the room felt heavy with anticipation. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Harrison, and we all rose to our feet. The judge took his place on the bench and arranged the files in front of him. He wasted no time in getting the proceedings started and addressed both legal teams immediately. He requested the updated financial records that were due for submission today. My heart beat a little faster as the moment of truth finally arrived. This was the pivot point of my entire plan. Evelyn's young attorney stood up and approached the bench with a confident stride. He handed over a stack of documents outlining their demands for the divorce settlement. They were asking for an even 50-50 split of all liquid assets and property. I listened to his speech about fairness and marital contribution with a straight face. He had no idea that half of zero was still zero. It was hard to keep from smiling as he returned to his seat. Marcus stood up next and presented our own set of financial documents to the judge. He explained that due to recent bad investments and market downturns, the liquidity was gone. The judge took the papers and scanned the summary page with a frown. The printed statements clearly showed the empty balances across all major accounts. Marcus remained professional and apologetic as he delivered the news. The courtroom went silent as the judge processed the information. I turned my head slightly to gauge Evelyn's reaction to the bombshell Marcus just dropped. I expected to see shock, anger, or at least a flicker of confusion. Most people would panic upon hearing that $100 million had vanished overnight. I wanted to savor the moment she realized her payday was gone. However, her expression remained completely unreadable. She simply stared straight ahead at the judge, appearing entirely unbothered. Evelyn didn't even glance at her lawyer before reaching down into her tote bag. She produced a heavy blue folder that looked old and worn around the edges. Without saying a word, she stood up and walked toward the bench. She placed the file directly in front of Judge Harrison. Her movements were calm and deliberate, not frantic. I glanced at Marcus, but he just shrugged, clearly confused by this unplanned submission. The empty bank account seemed to be the least of Evelyn's concerns right now. She pointed a manicured finger at the folder she had just delivered. Her voice was steady as she asked the judge to review the contents immediately. She claimed it was relevant to the origin of the marital assets in question. I felt a sudden cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't a negotiation tactic, this was an ambush. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles and flipped open the cover of the blue folder. The room was deadly silent, save for the rustling of paper as he turned the pages. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the old photocopies and handwritten notes. I tried to see what was inside, but the angle was impossible. Every second that ticked by increased the tension in the room. The judge's demeanor shifted from bored to intensely focused. The judge paused on a specific document and looked up over the rim of his glasses. The papers detailed the incorporation of my first company 3 decades ago. It wasn't just business registration forms, there were witness statements and bank transfers attached. Evelyn had dug up the buried history of how I really started my empire. These weren't just financial records. They were proof of a felony. My stomach dropped as I realized she knew about the original crime. I couldn't sit still any longer and instinctively rose to my feet. Judge Harrison's gaze turned to me, and it was no longer neutral. There was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there a moment ago. He didn't tell me to sit down, which was even more alarming. My legs felt weak, but I locked my knees to keep from swaying. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from a civil dispute to something criminal. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the uniformed bailiff take a step in my direction. He placed his hand on his belt, hovering near his equipment. The judge flipped through the remaining pages with increased speed. He seemed to be cross-referencing the dates on the documents with the dates in my file. The air conditioning hummed, but I suddenly felt incredibly hot. The walls of the courtroom felt like they were closing in. I nudged Marcus hard with my elbow and whispered for him to do something. This evidence was a surprise and should have been inadmissible in a standard divorce hearing. But Marcus just stared at the papers on the judge's bench, his face pale. He pulled his arm away from me and remained seated, looking down at his hands. He realized the severity of what was in that folder. I was completely on my own. The back doors opened softly, and a woman in a sharp gray suit slipped inside. I recognized her as the district attorney, which made my blood run cold. Judge Harrison waved her over and handed the blue folder directly to her. She began reading the top sheet immediately, nodding her head as she parsed the information. This had been orchestrated perfectly by Evelyn. They weren't just here for my money anymore, they were here for me. I looked across the aisle at the woman I had underestimated for so many years. Evelyn looked the picture of serenity, brushing a piece of lint off her skirt. She didn't look at me, but a faint smile played on her lips. She had known I would try to hide the money. She had waited for me to commit perjury before playing her card. Her patience was terrifying. The district attorney finished her quick review and leaned toward the bailiff. She whispered a command, and the officer nodded sharply. He moved from his station and positioned himself directly in front of the double doors. Any thought I had of walking out of there vanished instantly. The exit was blocked and the trap was sprung. I looked around for another way out, but there was none. The prosecutor turned to the court and addressed the room in a clear voice. She stated that the documents proved the initial capital for my business was stolen. Specifically, I had embezzled the funds from the estate of Evelyn's late father while acting as the executor. The paper trail was undeniable and linked directly to my first accounts. The secret I had kept for 30 years was out in the open. I had built a kingdom on stolen land. Judge Harrison didn't need to hear any more arguments from the lawyers. He declared that since the seed money was stolen from her family, the entire fortune belonged to her. The offshore transfer I made that morning was now considered evidence of further fraud. He ordered the immediate repatriation of the full $100 million to Evelyn as restitution. I had lost everything in a matter of minutes. My clever plan had backfired in the worst possible way. The judge banged his gavel, signaling the end of the civil portion of the hearing. Before the echo faded, 2 police officers entered from the side door. They walked straight toward me with grim expressions. I tried to step back, but the table blocked my path. They grabbed my arms firmly and twisted them behind my back. The metal cuffs clicked loudly as they secured my wrists. The charge was grand larceny, a felony that carried a significant prison sentence. As the officers turned me around to march me out, I finally caught Evelyn's eye. She wasn't smiling anymore. She just looked at me with cold indifference. She had reclaimed her father's legacy and destroyed me in one stroke. I was being hauled away like a common criminal while she sat there as a multimillionaire. The officers shoved me forward, guiding me out of the courtroom and into the corridor. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me with a final, booming thud. The sound echoed down the long, empty hallway, marking the end of my life as I knew it. I was walking toward a cell, leaving my freedom and my fortune behind. Evelyn had won.